humbly hearted rise, won't be divided, rise, with Spirit to guide us, rise, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise, all of the children rise, elders with wisdom rise, ancestors surround us, rise, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise, up from the wreckage, rise, with tears and with courage, rise, fighting for life, we rise, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise, humbly hearted rise, won't be divided, rise, with Spirit to guide us, rise.
Hi, I'm Wendy Abrams from Chicago, immediate past chair of National Women's Philanthropy. Welcome to the session When There Are No Answers, Jewish Wisdom and Living in Uncertainty. Thank you for joining us today. Recordings of this session and all the other workshops will be available online after the GA ends. I hope you're all planning to join us tonight at 7 for the Federation Together plenary. Whether we like it or not, we're all learning to live with uncertainty. And while we may be living in unprecedented times, we are not the first Jews to face a precarious situation, and we're not without resources to guide us. Jewish learning has always been an anchor in challenging situations, and we can benefit from understanding how Jewish communities have survived times like these. Today, we are lucky to have a fabulous guide, Rabbi Avi Strasberg, the Director of National Learning Initiatives at Hadar, an innovative and non-denominational center of Jewish learning in New York. Together, we'll study both classical and modern texts, with Rabbi Strasberg in search of Jewish wisdom to help us cope with uncertainty ourselves and offer leadership to others. Please know that you can ask questions or comments in the chat box, and the closed caption option is available as well. I am pleased to welcome Rabbi Avi Strasberg. She's going to turn our Zoom into our Beit Midrash, a house of study, asking us for reflections and input where possible. Rabbi, take it away. Thank you.
Wendy, thank you so much for that introduction. My name is Avi Strasberg, and I'm calling into you from Washington, D.C. It is such a joy and a pleasure to be joined by you to do some learning together today. This question of uncertainty is something that I've been thinking about what is the Jewish wisdom that we have in our tradition that can help us think about how to be in the moment that we are in. The Jewish people have a history of being in uncertain times. From our the beginning, our inception as a Jewish people, we spent those 40 years wandering. First of all, we get pulled out of Egypt and pulled into relationship with a God that was new to us, that we didn't know. So there certainly was an uncertainty there in beginning that leap of faith and beginning that new relationship. And then once we enter into relationship with God, there are those 40 years that we spent wandering in the wilderness, not knowing exactly where we're going or when we're going to get there. That promise of the promised land. And then finally we get there. And then the Jewish people experience exile after exile of being sent from our land, of not having the home base. We finally have the temple, and the temple is destroyed. So the Jewish people is really no stranger to uncertainty, no stranger to not knowing when are we going to get there? Where is that place are we going? What is it going to look like when we get there? And so when we in our lives right now find ourselves in a moment of uncertainty, of not knowing exactly where are we going? When are we going to get there? How long are we going to be in this moment for? What is it going to look like? What's the world going to look like when we get there? What's the world that we're hoping to arrive in? I think that the Jewish tradition is really the perfect place to turn to for answer, for wisdom of how do we sit with uncertainty, and how do we lead through uncertainty? And that's my hope of what we're going to think about in our session today. How do we sit with uncertainty, and how do we lead through uncertainty? We're going to be looking at 3 different case examples, 3 different examples of moments in which the Jewish people found them sitting with uncertainty. And we're going to see what the leadership did. How did the leadership lead their way through that moment? What can we learn, or what do we want to not learn from the examples set by leadership? And what wisdom might we apply onto our lives? So that's where we're going here. I just want to say 2 more notes of introduction. One, the beautiful music we were listening to as we came in, that song is called We Rise by Batya Levine. I feel like I think it's a lot of people's anthem right now, but it's definitely my anthem. We rise, that we find ourselves in love, in faith, and prayer. So that was that song, and I'm grateful for it. In terms of the questions, as Wendy said, you can submit questions in the chat. Of housekeeping note, I'm not going to be following those questions throughout the session. The session will break up into basically 3 different sections you'll see, and at the end of each section, I'll pause, and Andrew, who is helping me co-facilitate here, he'll throw a few questions my way. So I'm not seeing a running stream of your questions, but there will be a moment at the end of each section for your questions and for your thoughts to bring your voices in. And without further ado, we're going to jump in. So I'm going to be Andrew, if you could, we're going to share the link to the source sheet. If you want to pull up the source sheet in your own window, you're welcome to, but I'm also going to be screen sharing it, so you are welcome to stay with me right here. I will make this bigger so we have a nicer view of the screen. Okay, there you go. So the very first text we're going to be looking at comes from the Torah. It comes from the book of Shemot, from the book of Exodus. And the context here is the Jewish people has just been brought out of Egypt. They've just been brought out of slavery. Thank God, Moshe and God has brought them out. They are no longer enslaved. And almost no sooner than they get out, what do those people start doing? They start grumbling. They start grumbling. They start complaining. They start whining. They're upset about something. And the question that we're going to read this text together here. The questions that I want you to ask yourself are, what do the people say that they need? And what do they really need? What are they asking for? What do they say they need? But actually, what's the real complaint? What's really going on for them underneath it? And how does the leadership respond to their need? What's the response? And I want you to take note, the word here for grumbling that we're going to hear is tluna. Tunatchem is your grumbling. I'm going to be reading in the English, but just take note of how many times I say the word grumbling, okay? How many times the Torah, which is supposed to be a document that is sparse on words, that only every word is valuable. So if you hear a word repeated, it's supposed to mean something, you're supposed to interpret it. How many times in this text do you hear the word grumbling? So the questions are that I want you to be thinking about while I'm reading this are, what do the people say they need? And what's really going on? What do they really need? And how does leadership respond? Okay, what does all this have to do with uncertainty? So here we're in this text. We've just come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moshe and Aharon. Vayilonu kol adat b'nei Israel. So the very first sentences, you know that this is a story about discontent. You know this is a story about grumbling. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. So it seems like, what do the Israelites say that they need? First of all, they seem to be saying that they need food. They're saying, I'm not sure what kind of slavery they were experiencing in Egypt, but their memory of their experience of oppression, their memory of the experience of slavery is one in which they sat around all day eating pots of meat. It sounds like a pretty good situation. I'm not sure that reflects the reality, but their memory is when we were in Egypt, we had access to all the food we needed, all the pots of meat that we wanted. And now we're in this desert and we've got no food. We have nothing. You brought us out here to starve. And so it seems like they're grumbling. What they're upset about is their empty stomachs. They're upset that now they don't have food. That's what they're saying they need. The question is really, what are they really upset about? Then the Lord said to Moshe, I will rain down bread from heaven for you, right? What do the people say they need? We had food then, and now we don't have food, we're hungry. And so what's God's response? Oh, I'll give you food. So is that response meeting the need? Is that really what's going on? The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. And this way I will test them. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. So this is interesting. The people are upset. The people are grumbling. They're saying, we had all the food we needed. We had the pots of meat we could sit around. They're saying we need food. Really, I think what's going on underneath this, I think that there's a lot of uncertainty. I think there's a lot of insecurity. I think there's a lot of fear. I think there's a little bit of, who is this man that we followed out of Egypt? Where is he taking us? Who is this God? Do we really trust this person? Do we have faith in this God? So they're saying that they need food, but really what this is about is this is a text about deep uncertainty. This is a text about deep fear. It's a text about not knowing where they're going. It's a text that's about a lack of faith. And how does God respond? God responds by saying, oh, you need food. I'll give you food. But not only am I going to give you food, I'm going to give you food in the form of a test. I'm going to test you to see if you're faithful to my Torah or not. So the question here I would ask you is this the right response for the people in this moment? Given what's really going on with them, is a test the thing that you need in this moment? So God is going to test them. How is God going to test them? In this way, I will test them and see whether they follow my instructions. On the sixth day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other day. So every day of the week, the manna is going to fall. You gather a certain amount, but on the sixth day, you gather twice as much, and that's going to be enough for Friday and for Shabbat. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening, you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning, you will see the glory of the Lord because he has heard your tunatchem. He has heard your grumbling against him, right? You'll see by the fact that God is going to give you food, you will see the glory of the Lord. You might be doubting the Lord right now, but you will see the glory of the Lord because God has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us? Key word here, grumble. Moshe also said, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you the meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. How many times in this paragraph, over and over and over, what is Moshe hearing? The people, presumably, I would say the people are experiencing deep fear, deep insecurity, a deep lack of faith, right? This totally new relationship, this new covenant. And what is Moshe as the leader here? Moshe hears grumbling. It reminds me of my kids that so much of the time, once you sort of get in that mode as a parent, that all you hear from your kids is like constant grumbling, whining. And it's like, perhaps there's a deeper need going on. Perhaps they are really upset about something. Perhaps they're really concerned about something. Perhaps Zoom school is not going well. But what you're hearing on the surface is a lot of grumbling. And sometimes when you get in the mode as the leader of hearing the grumbling, you only hear the grumbling, and it's hard to hear the deeper need. So Moshe's hearing a lot of grumbling right now. Then Moshe told Aaron, say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, ki shama et tlunotchem. Come before the Lord, for the Lord has heard your grumbling. While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moshe, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. So it's not just Moshe that's hearing the grumbling, also God is hearing the grumbling. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. So if the problem here, the people say in that opening paragraph, they say, we had all the food we ever needed. We had the meat pots. We could sit all day and eat. If the real problem in the text, what they say they need is we don't have enough food, then this is a good answer. They're getting the food they need. Don't worry. I'm going to give you the meat in the evening. You're going to get the bread in the morning, and you will be filled and you will know God. But if there's a deeper problem, if the problem is not about hunger, if the problem is about real existential insecurity, if the problem is not knowing where we're going or when we're going to get there or what that life is going to be like, does this solution that they're being presented with actually answer that need? In the evening, quail appeared and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a fall of dew about the camp. When the fall of dew lifted, there over the surface of the wilderness lay a fine and flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moshe said to them, that is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is sort of incredible. The people, what are they people upset about? They're either upset about being hungry, or perhaps they're also upset about their whole world has totally been shifted. Everything, the familiarity and security of Egypt, even if it was oppression, even if it was bondage, at least it was something they recognized. At least it was something they knew. And I would argue what's going on here in the story is this is not just a story about simple hunger. This is a story about uncertainty. This is a story about nothing here is familiar. Nothing here is recognizable. This wilderness is a wilderness that we don't know, and we don't even know where we're going. And so God is offering them manna, God is offering them food, but even the food doesn't come in a form they recognize. Earlier, we heard, and in the morning, you're gonna have lechem, tisfa'u lachem, right? You're gonna get the bread. At least bread would be a food they recognize. What do they actually get? They don't get bread. They get a fine, flaky substance that they have to say to each other, what is this? What do we do with it? How do we cook it? How do we eat it? And they have to be told by Moshe, this is bread. So on one hand, we have these stories of the manna in the desert as being, there are these interpretations that say the manna, it could, with the most beautiful taste like honey, or it could taste like any taste you wanted it to taste like. There was something sort of magical about the manna, that the manna is this gift from God of nourishment that you could rely on every day, that had this taste that you wanted. Or on the other hand is the manna is something that they don't even recognize. It's this unfamiliar food that's like a dew that they don't even know is food for a people. If really the deep need in this text is not about hunger, if the deep need in this text is about nothing here is familiar, everything here is new, everything is uncertain, how would the people feel about this new substance? This is the bread you're to eat from now on. So this is it. This is the bread that the Lord is giving you to eat. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much and some little, and they measured it by the omer. The omer is the amount that they were supposed to gather. When they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little, that everyone gathers exactly the right amount that they're supposed to be gathering. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until the morning. Why? Because the way that manna works is, if the exact right amount that you need for that day falls in the morning, you use it all on that day, and then the next day, the next portion of manna falls. So there's something incredible about the manna. What's incredible about the manna is it's something that you can, assuming you trust in God, assuming you have faith in God, it's something that is steadfast, that you can rely on, that will be there every morning, that you can count on it. On the other hand, if you're a people that's struggling with faith, that's struggling with deep insecurity, that's not sure if you believe in this God yet, that you haven't yet had time to develop that relationship, the manna also represents total instability and food insecurity. Because you only, as soon as you use it up for that day, you don't know, well, what if God doesn't provide? What if God doesn't come through the next day? So the manna is simultaneously the symbol for security, for the thing that you can count on that will be there every morning, but only if you have faith. Otherwise, the manna can represent the flip side of food insecurity. What if it doesn't fall tomorrow? What if I don't have food tomorrow? What if it doesn't come? We'll just be in this wilderness without food. Okay, so Moses says, you've got to have faith. The way this works is it falls every morning. No one is to keep it over until the morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moshe. They kept part of it until the morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. And Moses was angry with them, because what happens with the manna, when you leave it over until the morning, it goes really, really bad. It goes really, really wrong. And so when Moshe sees that the people don't have faith in God, when Moshe sees that the people hasn't passed this test, remember all of this, there's this level of this in which this is actually a test. God says, this is a test to see, will the people have faith in me? Will they follow my instructions? When Moshe sees that the people don't have faith, they don't follow the instructions, they leave it over, maybe because they want to have a little bit of control over the life. They feel like everything in their lives right now is not in their control. This new God, this new leader, this new wilderness, they want to have a little control, so they leave it over. What happens? The manna goes bad, and Moshe is angry with them. I want to read one more text together and then bring this all together, and then I want to hear your thoughts on it. So in Masechet Yoma, in the Talmud of Yoma, it quotes a verse from the book of Devarim, from the book of Deuteronomy, that is referring back to, so much of the book of Deuteronomy is referring back to, remember those things that happened before. Remember Sinai, remember coming out of Egypt, remember. And so in the book of Devarim, we're talking about God, Moshe is reminding us what happened with the manna. And Moshe says, Hamachilcha man ba'midbar lema'an anutecha. So God that fed you manna, that fed you that precious food in the wilderness. Why? In order to afflict you. So here, it's not even our text that said, God gave us the manna in order to test us, to see would we follow the instructions of only taking for that day and not leaving any morning, of not going out on Shabbat, knowing that we had enough food. Would we follow those instructions? Here, it's a step further. The manna is not just given to us as a test, it's actually given to us as an affliction. Right? This food that on one hand, we have this notion of manna being, the food that connects us to God, that's God providing us with nourishment, this food that can take on any taste that we need it to take, this sort of fantasy food. Here we're learning in the book of Deuteronomy is actually a food. It was a substance that was given to afflict us. So the question here for the rabbis is, in what way is the manna, this food from God, nourishment from God, in what way is manna an affliction? What about manna is an affliction? And so Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, these two rabbis, we're not sure which rabbi said what, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, Chad Amar, Eino domeh misha yesh lo pat b'salo, le misha ein lo pat b'salo. So they say, it's not similar. One who has bread in his basket is not similar to one who doesn't have bread in his basket. Which is to say what? One who has bread in his basket, that's the person who has control over their food. That's the person who has enough for today's meal, and they have a little extra food left over in their pantry. They have a stock house, they have those cans of beans and rice and bread. And so they know, even though they only need the food that they have here, they know they have the security of knowing I have extra food. I have more if I need it. I have control over the food. That person is not similar to someone who doesn't, who doesn't have extra food in that basket. The second case is someone who only has the food they have and they have no extra food supply. That person is food insecure. And so the Israelites in the wilderness, they are equated here in this analogy. They are the ones she'ein pat bisalo, that they don't have extra food in their basket. On the one hand, the manna is a gift from God, and God is giving us exactly the right amount of food, exactly what we need. We just have to trust God. We just have to rely on God. And yet there's an affliction in that because we don't have that extra food. We don't have that feeling of security. We're actually food insecure in this story. Okay, so what is this story all about? Why do I bring this story? I think that there's a couple of takeaways from the story, and then I'm going to be curious to hear your questions and your thoughts on this. I think that ultimately I read this story as being a story about uncertainty, a story about a people wandering in the wilderness with a new God, with a new leader, them not knowing where they're going, and their uncertainty sometimes even in us manifests in different ways, right? And we're all, I think, experiencing uncertainty to different degrees and in different ways. And I imagine for each of us that insecurity is manifesting in different ways. For some of us, maybe it's manifesting as stress or as anger or as sadness, or we're having compulsive behaviors around this, or I've been buying a lot of luxury hand soaps. That's where my insecurity, I'm buying things that are like making my hands feel good. We're doing different things, but it's insecurity nonetheless, and it manifests in different ways. And so I would say this is a story about insecurity, where the Israelites' insecurity, their fear, their uncertainty, it manifests in them in this recollection of, we had it good in Egypt, we had all the food, and what they say is, we are hungry, we need food. Maybe they're hungry, I don't know. But I think that they're not just hungry, I think that they're uncertain. And the response of the leadership, what Moshe hears and what God hears is, they hear two things. One, they hear grumbling. They hear a lot of complaining. That sometimes when you're leading people through uncertainty, what do you hear? You don't hear the deep need, you hear the grumbling and the complaining. So I think Moshe in this moment, he just hears a lot of noise. He just hears a lot of grumbling, okay? But two, I think presumably what they hear is, oh, you're hungry, we'll give you food. That I think that they read this as being a technical problem. There's a technical problem. The people say they need food, and they need food, but really it's not a technical problem. I would say it's an adaptive problem. This is a people that really needs to be transformed. This is a people that has been enslaved, and now they're brought into freedom, and they need to develop this relationship with God that's not gonna happen overnight. It doesn't happen just because they got brought out, because as soon as they brought out, they lose their faith in God. This is gonna be to develop that faith and trust in God. This is gonna take years. I mean, it does take years, it takes generations. And so my takeaways here are, one is when we're in these moments of leadership, is that we have to, and we're leading people through uncertainty, it's really hard work to hear beyond the grumbling. There's the grumbling, but actually what's underneath it, and to think really carefully. Someone might be saying, this is what I need, but the work of the leader at leading through uncertainty is to be able to identify, but what's really going on? What's actually, and I think this is true whether you're talking about leading your friends or leading your coworkers or leading my children, that they say that they need something, but it's like, well, what's actually the underlying thing? And that when we're providing the solutions, the challenges, are we as leaders providing the solutions that address the real underlying need and not just the need that we're hearing? Okay, so I'm going to pause there. I'll stop screen sharing for a moment. I'm going to throw it over to Andrew, who's going to help us. If you have a question or a comment, we'll take a couple of moments to hear those now.
Hi, Avi, and hi, everyone. So I do see a question in here. So does faith require us to feel certain that we have enough in our pantry, the manna will fall? Or does faith require we come to terms with uncertainty as our condition, and that's the faith?
I think that's such a great question. That's really the definition of faith here. I would say very strongly, I think faith is coming to a place of acceptance with uncertainty. I've been reading writing a lot of Torah right now, the Eish Kodesh of Rabbi Kalman Shapira, who was writing during the time of the Holocaust from the Warsaw Ghetto. So writing during a time of, witnessing himself some of the greatest horrors. Uncertainty is not even the right word in terms of talking about, what he was seeing and what he was going through. And it's an incredible work to see what's the experience of a person of faith, maintaining their faith in the face of so many unanswerable questions that can't be answered. And so, yeah, I think that the answer there is, I don't know that we're ever, at least I'll say for me, I don't think we live in a world, I don't think we have a presence of, I don't have an experience of God in this world that I'm ever going to come to a place of certainty. So if that's what faith's about, I'm never going to get there. I think it's very much, as you phrased it so beautifully, that faith is about accepting the uncertainty. And I think that that's a journey. I think it's a life journey to get there. And I certainly think at this moment in the story, the Israelites are not ready to do that. But that's something that is going to take years for them to come to a place of coming to that kind of faith. That's a beautiful question. Thank you.
And yes, a beautiful question indeed. And it looks like there's another one based off of your earlier comments. So it says, so this is not a pass-fail test. It's more of a character development exercise, you would say?
That's a really interesting question. I actually read this in the Torah as being a pass-fail test, which is what I find problematic about it. And it seems like the Israelites fail the test, which is why Moshe gets angry with them, because they failed the test. And if we had continued on the text a little bit later, there's also a similar problem where the people go out on Shabbat. You know, they're only supposed to collect on the 6 days of the week and not go out on Shabbat and turn up. What do the people do? They go out on Shabbat because they they don't get it. They need, even though they had enough. And later on, 10 verses later, it's God that gets mad at the people. And so I read Moshe's anger and God's anger as them seeing this as a test that the Israelites failed. And it feels unfair to them, to me, because I feel like there's a deeper need. I just feel like this wasn't the right solution for what they're going through. But I like it better if it's about character development. It's an interesting way to think about it.
Great. So I have a few more questions here. The first one is the face mask of today Armana?
Is a face mask of today Armana? I need to hear more from the questioner to understand what that means. Maybe if the person, I need to have that develop more. Andrew, do you have a sense of how you would understand that?
I wish I could.
Yeah. Okay. So the person who wrote that, I think that's a really provocative statement, but I need to hear more to respond to that properly.
I'll make sure to message that individual. The second question is certainty, as you're using it here, similar to control?
I think that that's a really good question. I think that I do see a real connection here. Certainly in this story, I feel like I'm bringing those together. Yes, I think that I'd have to think about whether or not this is always true, but I mean, I'm thinking about it in this story and I'm thinking about it in my life right now in terms of COVID, that I think part of what is so hard about uncertainty is finding ourselves in situations where we don't have control over. I think there are different types of uncertainty we can have in our lives. Like you might have uncertainty in your life that's about, well, I have 5 different job offers and they're all great and I don't know which one to take. And that's a kind of uncertainty that's hard to sit with because you don't know where you're going to end up in. But I think that there's another kind of uncertainty, that's uncertainty when you don't have control of your choices or you don't have control over your life. Someone else is making those decisions. And I think that uncertainty feels like a much harder uncertainty to sit with, the uncertainty that's connected to feeling powerless.
Great.
Andrew, let's do maybe one final question on this unit.
My thought exactly. So the last question that came in, who does not understand the deeper meaning of the grumbling, Moses and Aaron or God? The answer has different implications.
Yeah, this is a deep question. And I think I'm offering sort of a challenging read on the story. Like, this is not a story. Sometimes I feel like we turn to Jewish tradition to learn, here's amazing wisdom, let's apply this leadership to our life. I actually feel like I turn to the story and feel like here was a failure in leadership or here was a letdown and let's learn from it in a different way. I actually think that, I cut the story a little bit shorter for the sake of time. And also because I was nervous about going to the place of, it's easier for me to say, I think Moshe was mishearing the grumbling than to say God is. But yeah, I actually do think that it's both Moshe and God in this story that mishear the grumbling. Both Moshe and God use that word of, I've heard your grumbling, I've heard your grumbling. I get the sense that they're just hearing the grumbling, seeing the people sort of, there's a dismissal of the people as, I brought you out of Egypt, get over it, you're fine, and not sort of recognizing very real sort of pain that I think uncertainty can bring up. And I think both Moshe in this story and also God later, though you didn't see that part of the text, express anger when the people don't sort of rebound or are not as resilient enough to respond well to the test. So I think it's actually on the part of both Moshe and God.
Excellent. Okay, throwing it back to you.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you so much for those questions. And thank you all of you. I know that there are other questions out there, and it's good I appreciate, even though I'm not getting to respond to all of them, to know that you're engaging in the material. And I hope that in some other mode, I get to learn with you again and get to hear all of your questions more fully. So we're gonna now go into screen sharing. and look at our next text together. This is a text that I find a beautiful text and also a painful text. So this text comes from the Talmud. It comes from Tractate Temora. And we'll just go into it, and then you'll see it as we're reading it. So Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says 3,000 halachot, 3,000 laws were forgotten during the days of mourning for Moses. Such a powerful idea. The connection of forgetting laws, of forgetting things, of loss, connecting to mourning. That in the days when the people were mourning for Moses, so deep were they in their mourning, that there's this association with not only does, I think that there's two things here. A, so deep were they in the mourning, that the mourning results in them forgetting these halachot, thousands of laws, right? And what are laws? But they're not arbitrary laws. Laws are the things, literally the word halacha is the path that we go. Laws are the things that tell us how to live our lives, that they're in the moment of mourning for Moshe, they're in a moment of extreme personal loss of a leader, and they forget all the knowledge, these 3,000 laws about how to live their life. I think the second part of that is it's the connection of, what is so hard about, one of the things that is hard about death is when the person goes, there's a lot of knowledge and wisdom that goes with the person. That's a reality that, when Moshe dies, no matter how much he might have tried to give over those laws to the people or pass them on to Joshua, to the next leader, there's a reality that when Moshe dies, there was knowledge and there was memory that dies with him. And so during that period of mourning, there's something to me so painful about this and also so real about it, that in that period of mourning for Moshe, 3,000 halachot, 3,000 laws teaching them how to live their life were lost. So they're not only coming out of the mourning for the leader, they've actually literally lost the laws that Moshe gave him. So what do? The Jewish people said to Joshua, so Joshua, who is next in line to be the leader, whom Moshe has handed over the leadership to Joshua, they say, in the text here you see, Sha'al, they say, ask. So simple. They say one word to him. They say, ask. What are they asking? What are the people saying to them? They're saying to him, ask God for the laws. Like ask the heavens, ask someone, get those laws back to us. It's such a plaintive cry. They've lost 3,000 laws in the loss of Moshe. And so they turn to Joshua and they say one word to Joshua. They say, ask. But what that ask means is go back to God and get those laws for us. We need those laws. And what does Joshua say? Joshua quotes them a verse from the book of Deuteronomy, where Joshua says, Lo b'shamayim hi. It's not in the heavens. What is that verse there? Lo b'shamayim hi. It's not in the heavens means? It means the laws are no longer in the heavens. God gave them over to us. God put them so that they would be close to us, which means that now that the laws have been lost, Lo b'shamayim hi, they're no longer in the heavens. Joshua is saying, I can't just go and ask God and get them for God. God turned those over to us and we had them in our control. And now that we've lost them, there's no easy solution to get them back. It's like they have been forever forgotten. Many years later, the Jewish people again said to Shmuel, Sha'al, they said to Samuel, ask. So powerful, right? Generations later, first they asked Joshua in the immediate mourning for Moshe. And now we're seeing many years later, the people still haven't recovered those halachot. The people are still in pain. They're still lacking that knowledge. They're still turning to their leaders. And they're sort of like, you imagine this people that's lost. And they're just going from leader to leader saying, ask, get those laws back from us. So now they go to Shmuel and they say to Shmuel, ask for guidance on this. Get the laws back from God. And what does Shmuel say to him? Shmuel quotes to them a verse from the book of Leviticus. He says, Ele ha-mitzvot. These are the commandments. So the fuller quote there, as you see it in the English, these are the commandments that the Lord commanded Moshe to tell the children of Israel at Mount Sinai. From the language of Ele ha-mitzvot, these are the mitzvot. It implies she'ein hanavi rashai lichadesh devar me'ata. It implies that a prophet doesn't have the ability or is not permitted to create new laws, to create new interpretations. So the language of Ele ha-mitzvot, these are the laws, implies these, the ones I'm giving you today, right now, these are the laws, but you can't come and get more laws. There's no other laws that you can go seeking. So Shmuel is giving them a different answer, a different verse, instead of saying, as Joshua says, Lo b'shamayim hi, the laws are no longer in the heavens. Shmuel says, like, we had one shot at this. These are the laws. And if we forgot those laws, I can't give you new laws. I can't reinterpret something new for you. I can't go and get them. We had the laws and we lost them. So painful. At the time of Moshe's death, now we're going back in time, the people said to Pinchas, said to another leader, ask again, that one word, ask. Again, they're saying to Pinchas, so they asked Joshua, they asked Shmuel going forward in time. Now we're going backward. They also asked Pinchas, presumably perhaps when Joshua said, Lo b'shamayim, he is not in the heavens, and now they're also asking Pinchas. And Pinchas says, again, like Joshua, Lo b'shamayim, it's not in the heavens. I can't get it back for you. God turned it over to us. It's no longer there. And again, we see, and then the people go to Eleazar, another leader of the time. So they go to Pinchas, they don't get the answer they want. Pinchas can't give it to them. Pinchas said, Lo b'shamayim hi. Now they go to Eleazar again, they say, ask. Amar lehem ele ha-mitzvot. He quotes that same verse from Leviticus that we heard Shmuel quote, these are the mitzvot, she'ein navi rashai lechadesh davar me'ata. That these are the mitzvot, these ones, and no other ones. And a prophet isn't able to sort of reinterpret or bring new mitzvot or laws going forward. I think this is such a powerful text. There's an element of time travel in this text where we're going from the moment of the death of Moshe to forward to back again. But what we see is two things. One, we see that sometimes around great loss, the kind of loss that we're experiencing right now, it's not only the loss of, God forbid, the person, but it's also the loss of what went with that person. Sort of there's a loss of knowledge, there's a loss of memory, there's a loss of certainty, there's a loss of history. And we see that in the death of Moshe. It's not only that Moshe dies, but actually these 3,000 halachot are lost with him. And then we see in the wake of his death that people are just lost. They don't know what to do. And so they're going from leader to leader to leader to say, get it back for us, get it back for us. And the leaders very powerfully, like, what is it? What does a leader do? If here's the question for our session, how do you lead in a moment of uncertainty? What does a leader do when a people who is lost is coming and saying, please fix it for us. We don't have the answers. What does the leaders do? Very powerfully, they say, there's nothing we can do. Or they say, there's nothing I can do, right? They say, I can't go to God and get it back for you. I can't create new ones. There might be two ways of reading this. One might be, we have to sit in the loss. We have to sit in the uncertainty. We had what we had and I can't go and get it back for you. That might be one way of reading it. There might be a second, more subtle way of reading it, which is that Lo b'shamayim hi, it's not in the heavens. She'ein navi rashai lechadesh davar. I can, as the prophet, I can't create something new for you, but who can create where can the laws come from? Maybe they could come from the people. But I think the leaders are doing something very powerful in this text. On one hand, it's very hard when people are suffering in uncertainty to do as Pinchas and Shmuel and Joshua are doing. You just want to give the answer. You want to give any answer. You want to give any certainty, and they're not doing it. It's very hard. They're resisting the urge to sort of solve it for them when they can, and to just say, it's not in the heavens, or to say, I can't do it for you. The other thing that they might be doing more subtly is actually empowering the people. That the people, when they're suffering with this loss, the first thing that you get the sense that they're not trying on their own to recover the laws. They're not trying on their own to use their own communal memory to figure it out. They're just immediately going, sort of shifting from leader to leader to leader to leader to leader. Hundreds of years go by to leader. And perhaps what these leaders are doing is they're saying, it's not on God, it's not on us. If that knowledge is going to come from anywhere, it's got to come from you. And that the leaders are really turning back to the people and empowering the people to work their way through that uncertainty. Okay, I'm going to pause there. And again, I'll turn it back to Andrew. I'd love to hear your questions and thoughts. We'll take a few of them.
Okay, well, going back to the question that we couldn't really answer, I actually had an anonymous attendee post their thoughts. I look at the question about face mask as a solution to the problem, just as manna was the solution to hunger and the people grumbled. Yes.
So again, I'm still not. I'm going to read into that because I'm still not sure if yes. There's a sense, and so my sort of the deeper answer is like the way I would then go next is there's a sense in which if the masks are really like the manna, then they work and they don't work. So like to fit the technical need and the adaptive need. So like the technical need is to the extent that masks are effective in preventing the spread of germs, that perhaps they are. I mean, maybe there's the sort of the one need that we need the mass to serve is preventing the spread of dirge and keeping us safe. I think the second need that we need the mass to serve in the way that we need the mana to serve is, are they also making us feel safer? Are they both doing the job of preventing the spread of germs? And also, when we see mass and we see behavior of mass being reinforced, does it make us feel safer? I think in some ways, I think it does make us feel safer. And so maybe there's a sense in which the mass are like the mana, or maybe more than the mana, working on two different levels of both the technical of the health conscious of preventing the spread of germs, but also are they providing us with a sense of security, a sense of control of this is at least something that I can control, of putting the mask on, of taking care of myself and taking care of others.
A very interesting perspective. I actually just got another message about this saying that their belief would be a vaccine would be the mana.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I like where these questions are coming from, are thinking about if we apply this to our time, what is the thing that would, I mean, I guess I would say, what are the needs we have right now and what are the things that would meet those needs? And so it's interesting to think about what are the things that might serve as mana in the period that we're in right now. What are the things, and I think a different way of answering that is, what are the things that would provide us with the sense of security and calm and certainty?
So I have two more questions here, going in a bit of a different direction. Where does Hester Panim play into the no response to the uncertainty?
Right. So Hester Panim is referring to God hiding God's face, or God's face being hidden. I think for me that goes back to the question in the earlier round: is faith about coming to a place of certainty, or is faith about accepting uncertainty? And I think that for me that goes back to, we seem to, or I live in a world, I'll speak for myself, but I think we seem to live in a world where at least at moments it feels like God, there's a hiddenness to God, or there's certainly, we don't live in a world, sort of in the earlier days, God, in the Torah, there was this idea of the Urim Tumim, of these sort of magical stones that were on the breastplate of the high priest, that when you had a question, you could turn to the high priest, you could turn to the breastplate and you could ask the Urim Tumim, and they would give you a clear answer. And God's divinity was being channeled through the Urim Tumim. That it's sort of this amazing world where I imagine there was no uncertainty. I mean, I'm sure there was uncertainty about certain things, obviously, as they were wandering the wilderness. Maybe that's actually, there's a sense in which maybe it's a straw man, that even when you have a thing that you can ask questions to and get an answer, there's still the greater questions about which you feel uncertain. But at least the idea that you could turn directly to God, to the Urim Tumim, and get an answer, or you could turn to the prophet and get an answer through God. We don't live in a world of prophets anymore, where we, for the most part, can turn to God and get a direct answer. So there's a sense in which there is a hiddenness. And then I do think that part of what faith is coming to grips not with certainty, but what it means to live without uncertainty.
Which this question comes in very timely. And you kind of answered part of it, but when Moshe experienced the loss of Miriam, he responded with anger striking the rock. Are we normalizing uncertainty just as we might normalize anger in response to loss?
I'm not sure. I would have to ask more of the questioner. I feel like normally normalizing has a negative connotation. I'm not sure if there's an implication that normalizing uncertainty. I mean, I would say, so I'm not sure I understand the question, so I invite the questioner to write back. I mean, I would say, I think uncertainty is, I would say, yeah, I think we are normalizing. I am normalizing uncertainty in the sense that I think that both, I feel like uncertainty in general is a part of our, even in not, when we're not in a COVID moment, I think uncertainty is a fact of life that we have to, I think uncertainty is a fact of life. I think living in a time in which God's presence, in which we don't just have these prophets we can go to, and we don't have the Urim, the Tumim we can turn to. I do think that uncertainty is a normal part of life. And especially now, where I think we're living in a time where uncertainty is so heightened, I don't think that we're doing any normalizing. I think it's been normalized. And I think anger is a normal part of loss. So I'm not sure if I understand the question, but that's how I would answer it.
I think that's a great interpretation. And then I think I'll save this, I'll make this the last question for the
Perfect.
session. Do you think people were ready to hear that it was in their hands? And do you think we're ready to hear it?
No. And that's what I think is so painful about this text. I think that there's something, I mean, first, I feel just so much empathy on the part of the leaders in this text and also on the part of the people. I feel like the leaders, how painful it must have been that we as leaders, as good leaders, I think when we're leading people through uncertainty, we want to be able to give them the certainty that they're looking for. When people have questions, we want to be able to answer those questions. We want to be able to make them feel better. We want to be able to help. Presumably that's why we're in positions of leadership in the first place. And how painful for Joshua and for Shmuel and for Pinchas and for Eleazar to have to say, I can't fix this for you. But sometimes that's what it means to be in a position of leadership, is that we're actually not always in a position where we can fix things for people. And sometimes you have to just be transparent and honest about that. And also painful on the part of the people. No, I think that they weren't I think that they couldn't hear, to the extent that it's a subtle empowerment of lo b'shamayim hi, to say it's not in the heavens, it's in your hands. I think that they weren't ready to hear that message. And it's evidence of the fact that for generations, part of that's what's so powerful to me about the story, is that for generations, they ask one leader, doesn't get the right answer. They ask another leader, that you feel that pain, the poignancy of, will someone just please fix this for us? And they're not able to, or they're not willing to, they're not able to, whatever it is, they're not able to find those answers to feel empowered inside. So it's painful on both parts. Great question.
Great.
Okay, Andrew, thank you so much for that. So we're going to go back in and we're going to look at one last case together. So I'll go back into screen sharing. Okay, here we are. So now we're jumping forward. In a sense, we're jumping forward to, so as I said, in the days of the Torah, there were these sort of magical stones embedded in the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol and the high priest, the Urim and Tumim, that you could ask your questions. Should we go to war? Should we not go to war? What should we do in this circumstance? And the Urim and Tumim would channel God's answer and would give you the answer. And then there were the times where the Urim and Tumim stopped functioning. They no longer could ask the Urim and Tumim, but at least they still sort of had prophecy or God's voice through a bat kol. Sort of the divine voice would come out and sometimes make pronouncements. And then the bat kol, that divine prophecy, also stopped answering. And so already by the times of the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Gemara, so we're talking 0 to 200 CE and 200 to 500 CE, there's a sense in which they're already beyond the time of the Urim and Tumim. They're already beyond the time of prophecy. They're living in a world, to the extent that, we were talking about Hester Panim, God's presence being hidden, or at least not having direct access to God in asking a question and getting an answer or a clear answer in that way. The rabbis, like us, are already living in that time period where they couldn't just ask the Urim and Tumim or ask a prophet, what do we do about this situation, and get a clear answer. That the rabbis, like us, were really having to sit with and wrestle with uncertainty and ultimately find their own way, answers through it. So I want to look at a very specific case example. In the Talmud of Tractate Beit Sa, Masechet Beit Sa. And so the question we're talking about is a pretty narrow halachic question, legal question, but we're going to make some meaning out of it. So they're talking about one of the differences between a Yom Tov, so a Yom Tov like Pesach or Shavuot or Pesach, and Shabbat, is that on a Yom Tov, within an Eruv, you can, you can carry food on a Yom Tov. Even without an Eruv, you can carry and you could prepare food, whereas you can't do that on Shabbat. So one of the major differences between a Yom Tov like Pesach or Shavuot and Shabbat is the ability to carry food and to prepare food. So that's what's being said in the Mishnah here. And then we're going to jump to the Gemara that's going to be commenting on, well, what do you mean that you can carry food? What does it look like to the extent that you're allowed to carry food on a Yom Tov? What are the stipulations? What are the conditions around that? So, and then we'll see a question on there. So Rav Yechiel teaches, and one may send these items, so you can send food items to a person, provided that he does not do so by means of a convoy of people. Why can't you do it by means of a convoy? The idea is if you're sending food to someone else by means of a convoy or sort of like a caravan or a bunch of people, it looks too similar to sending food on a market day. It feels too similar to something you would do on Chol, a day of everyday business, and it takes you out of the spirit of Yom Tov. So on one hand, we're saying you can send food to people, which is different than on Shabbat, but on the other hand, we're saying you can't do it in sort of a presence of a convoy that looks too similar to sending food on a market day. So what does it mean? What are the conditions around you can't shelo yasen b'shora, that you can't set it by means of a convoy? Tana ein shora pechuta mishlosha b'nei adam. So they say a convoy is no less than 3 people. So they're saying you can send food as long as you're not sending in a convoy of people, and a convoy is no less than 3 people, which is to say you can send food to someone if you're sending it with 1 person or with 2 people, but as soon as you get to 3 people, it looks too much like you're doing business on a market day, and you can't send food that way. It feels too much like it's not in the way of Yom Tov. So as long as you're sending food to people with either 1 person or 2 people, it's okay. Now we're going to get a strange and very specific rabbinic question. By Rav Ashe, tlata gavre v'tlata mine mai teku. So the question is, Rav Ashe wants to ask, well, what if this is the situation? What if you have 3 people? So that sounds like a convoy. So that would be bad according to this text, because that's too much like a market day. What if you have 3 people, but they're each bringing 3 different types of food? So you have person A bringing apples, person B bringing cheesecake, and person C is bringing a quiche. Is it still a convoy of 3 people bringing the same food that feels like it's a market day? Or because there are 3 people carrying 3 separate things, does it make it as if it's actually 1 and 1 and 1, and therefore it would be okay to send food that way in a Yom Tov? That's the question. What's the Gemara's answer? Teku. What does teku mean? Teku is the Aramaic for let it stand, or let it stand unresolved. So the idea of the teku is, on one hand, I would say just overall, the project of the Gemara is to have these situations and then to unearth and ask all these questions to try to come to the ultimate understanding and the ultimate truth. And sometimes the Gemara is not able to, in its search for truth, is not able to come to the answer, is not able to come to truth, that it doesn't know the answer. And then in those moments where the Gemara doesn't know the answer, where Rav Ashi asks a question, well, what if it's 3 people with 3 separate foods? Does that count as a convoy? Does that not count as a convoy? The answer will be teku, which means let it stand. We don't know the answer. And really the idea of a teku is let it stand forever. Let that question stand unresolved. We're never going to answer it. But there's a real problem there. So I want to say 2 things. On one hand, one thing I want to say is the teku is this, there's something so powerful about reading Gemara and arriving to a teku, because as much as the rabbis are trying to get at the answer or trying to get at the truth, sometimes the rabbis admit we don't have the answer. That's very powerful for rabbis that want to have the answers about things to be able to just say, teku, let it stand unresolved. That's something that it's a great question and we don't have the answer to. That the rabbis are offering us a way to sit with uncertainty and saying there are some questions about which we don't have the answer, and we just have to accept that, embrace uncertainty and sit with it. On the other hand, it's kind of a problem because sometimes you actually need an answer. So in this text, so now we have a real question, but you could imagine Rav Ashi, I mean, perhaps sometimes Rav Ashi is, perhaps the rabbi is asking a theoretical question just to sort of push the case and doesn't really care about the answer, but there's actually a practical dilemma here of like, well, but really, if it's a teku, if we really don't know the answer, what happens if I do have 3 people who are carrying 3 separate foods? Can they or can they not bring the food on a Yom Tov? So it's very nice to embrace uncertainty, but sometimes you actually need a halachic ruling. So on one hand, the text is offering us teku, a rabbinic model to embrace uncertainty. On the other hand, you might say, well, what about when we actually need an answer? What happens to those 3 people? Can they go or can they not go? Okay, so the first model I want to offer you is the model of the teku, which is that sometimes there are questions for which we have no answers, and we just have to embrace that and sit with the uncertainty. Okay. Second text I want to look at, this comes from the Mishnah of Eduyot, and we're going to learn a little bit about Elijah the prophet. So Elijah the prophet as a character, this is Elijah that you open the door for him on Pesach so that Elijah can waft in. Elijah is sort of an amazing character that seems to waft in and out of time in different generations, sometimes just appears in conversation, seems to have a direct ear and audience with God, so sometimes can bring information to God and back from God. And so we're learning in this text in the Mishnah, Rabbi Joshua, specifically Rabbi, they're talking about the different purposes that Elijah serves, and Rabbi Shimon here specifically says, when Elijah finally comes, what is Elijah as the heralding Elijah who heralds the messianic times, who heralds the world to come. What is Elijah going to do? L'hashvot hamachloket. That what Elijah is going to do is going to sort of answer disputes, is going to resolve machlokets. So on one hand, you have in that previous text, what is a teku? A teku is a dilemma or a question that you have to let it stand and will never be answered, that there are some questions that we have to permanently sit with that uncertainty and not get the questions. Sort of a second model is we have to sit with those questions until one day, hopefully, Elijah will come and Elijah will answer those questions and Elijah will settle those machlokot, will settle those dilemmas. So if the first model is sometimes there are questions that there are no answers in us or outside of us, you just have to sit with the uncertainty. The second model is we have to sit with uncertainty, but we sit with the uncertainty with the hope that one day the question will be answered, but it doesn't seem like it's in our power to answer it. It's going to come through some outside source of information. And in this text, it's going to come through Elijah. There's even an idea of rabbinic teaching that that teku, if you look here, is a Roshei Tevot. It's an acronym for Tishbi, Yitaret, Kushiyot, Vibayot. That Tishbi, Elijah was from the place of Tishbi, so Tishbi represents Elijah, that Elijah, Yitaret, will solve difficulties and problems. And so actually what is a teku? Is a teku something that will stand unresolved forever that we have to learn to live with? Or is a teku something that we don't have the answer now, but we just have to have patience and we have to have a little bit of trust and hope that one day Elijah will come and Elijah will answer those questions for us, but now is not the time. Okay? But still, you might say, but what about those three people with their three different types of food? Can they bring the food on the Yom Tov or not, right? Sometimes it's very nice to embrace uncertainty. It's very nice to embrace uncertainty with the hope that someday, with patience, someday you'll get the answer. I think that that's an important ethic to learn from the rabbis. And you might also say back to me, sometimes you actually need answers, especially when you're in a position of leadership. Sometimes, even if you don't have the information, you have to move forward. And so now for this final text, let's go to the Rambam. Let's go to Maimonides. So Maimonides, he's in the 12th century. And so I don't even want you to read his text yet because it's so phenomenal. I just want to remind you, this text that in the Gemara, that the Gemara said, you know, what happens if you have the three people, the three different foods? It was resolved, it was answered as a teku. There is no answer. There will never, either as there is no answer, there will never be an answer. You have to live with the uncertainty, or best case scenario, Elijah will answer it one day. Then you get just a few generations later to the Rambam in the 12th century. And what does the Rambam do? Let's read this Rambam together. Rambam says, if a person sends three types of food with three different people as one, mutar, this is permissible. The Rambam rules the exact situation that we saw Rav Ashi asking about in the Gemara, right? Three different people, three different foods. Does it count as a convoy such that it would be impermissible? Or is it three separate people such that it would be permissible? And the Gemara said, teku, there's no answer, let it stand forever. The Rambam, just 6 generations or however many generations later, the Rambam rules on it, the exact same situation. And the Rambam says, 3 people, 3 types of food. I know the answer, it's permissible. The question that was unresolved, the Rambam resolves. So I think that there's something incredible here about the Rambam, which is to say, it's great to embrace uncertainty. Sometimes we have to sit with uncertainty. Sometimes we have to know, this goes back to the lack of control, that things are out of our control. And we just have to accept that. And the lesson there is developing the nida, developing sort of the ability to be with that uncertainty, to sit with faith or patience that things will resolve themselves. There are things about that. I think the question of, my wife and I were supposed to travel to Israel to see her family on Pesach. That never happened. I think that there's a real question in our house and for her of, when am I going to see my family again? Like, that's a question around which we have no control. That's a question around which we have to just sit with the uncertainty. No information is suddenly going to reveal itself. We have to sit with the unknowing of, we don't know when we're going to go to Israel again. We don't know when she's going to see her family again. I think that belongs in sort of the category 1 or 2. We have to wait for the information. This is a category 3 of, and sometimes you actually just need to make decisions. So the question of, should I send my kid to school or not send my kid to school? You can't indefinitely sit with uncertainty on that. You can feel uncertainty for a while, but at the end of the day, when the school sends you the form, this is my very real life dilemma, when the school sends you the form saying, when we go back to in-person classes, are you sending your kid or not sending your kid? You have to do the best with the information you have. You can't say teku. You can't say let it stand resolved. You have to do the best with the information you have available, and you have to actually make a decision. And that's what the Rambam is doing here, that on a question that others ruled as unresolved, he says, we're not leaving this unresolved. We need an answer, and we need a way forward. I think I'm going to stop there. So just to sort of summarize what we saw here, I think we saw sort of, I would say, 3 different approaches to rabbinic dealings with uncertainty. Embracing the teku, embracing uncertainty was one, that there will never be an answer. 2 is, there's not an answer for now, but one day outside of us, someone else will provide the information that will bring the answer. And 3 is the Rambam of take the information you have and you got to go forward. And once you go forward, I think as the Rambam would say, there's no looking back. You have to go forward and feel good about your decision. And he just clearly rules without ambivalence, zeh mutar, this is permissible. Okay, we'll stop sharing for now. And Andrew, if there are questions or comments.
So there was one comment just made anonymously. The Rambam's answer is very empowering. When we need to, we can decide.
Yes, I absolutely, I agree with that. I mean, I think that I think that it's empowering. And I think there's also certain, like, I have a little bit of a disbelief, and there's like a chutzpah of the Rambam, that on this question that earlier generations ruled as a teku, that suddenly he feels he has the information he needs. He's going to make a ruling. And it's such a simple, straightforward ruling. And I think that can be really hard in our lives, especially right now, to get ourselves to a place where we can it's so hard to make decisions confidently right now with security. But yes, I do see in the Rambam, it's empowering to make those decisions, and also a security once we make them, to trust those decisions, to lean into them. Okay, any final questions or thoughts there, Andrew?
Another comment, as long as we cannot make decisions to go forward, left or right, we are vulnerable. Once we make a decision, it allows us to move forward.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to the issue of control, is that I do think I appreciated that comment earlier, sort of, that I think that there are different types of uncertainty we experience. And I think that the uncertainty that is the most sort of paralyzing or difficult is uncertainty that's where we lack control. And at least when we're able to making a decision, that making a decision is taking a little back of control for ourselves. Even if we feel like we don't have all the information available, just that active decision is giving us a bit of control.
Absolutely. Just got another question. Did he give a long explanation on this decision?
I don't believe he did. And I think that that's part of what I find so, I mean, that's also, like, that's not what the Rambam is known for. Even his whole project of the Mishnah Torah, the idea of the Mishnah Torah is not everyone is going to have the ability or the skill or the time to learn the Gemara. So, and the Gemara and all these other halachic sources. So I'm going to bring it all to you in an easy to understand format. So you just have to read my book. Again, the incredible chutzpah of the Rambam, and also a gift with the chutzpah. So that's just not so. Yeah, I don't think that he does give a long answer. And that's part of what is so powerful, is to take something that sat unresolved for 6 centuries and then just to make a clean, simple ruling on it.
Great. Well, I don't have any more questions. Oh, I lied. I have another, either a question or comment. There are times when not making a decision is in itself making a decision, in parentheses, like with the example you gave of sending your kids back to school in person. If you wait too long, the decision will be made for you.
Right. That is also true. I've also thought about that. Yeah, that's also true. Okay, I want to thank all of you. Before I want to thank Andrew for your help in reading through these comments. My hope and my wish is that I would get to learn with all of you again one day, God willing, in person, but even on Zoom, and get to see your faces and hear your voices. So thank you for the questions that I was able to address. I'm grateful for your questions, for the questions and comments that I wasn't able to address. I hope one day we'll get to learn together. And my blessing and my hope for us taking us out of the session. You know, I just bought, as I said, I'm buying all these Bath and Body Works lotions and soaps. I'm sure that that's the way my uncertainty is manifesting, of like, well, at least my hands are soft and smell good, everything will be okay in the world. And I tried out a new scent called, this is not a Bath and Body Works ad, I tried out a new scent called eucalyptus tea, and no lie, it says on the bottle, the purpose of the scent of the tea is to, like, calm uncertainty or something. it's not working. But but my hope and my blessing for us is twofold. Is one, as someone was saying, the normalizing of uncertainty, both in this time of COVID that we are in, and I'm sure going forward in the rest of our lives, uncertainty is a fact of our lives. And so I hope, as the Bath and Body Works scent promises me, that we can find a way to, like the rabbis, to embrace the uncertainty, to come to a certain peace with the uncertainty, to find the faith of accepting that we don't have the answers. And at the same time, that we can have the chutzpah of the Rambam, and when we need to take the information we have available to us and to make decisions, to take the control back and to go forward in our lives. So a blessing of both embracing uncertainty, but also embracing decisions when we're able to, and to go forward and trust our own decisions. So thank you to all of you, and turning it back over to Wendy.
And
well, Wendy,
I really
before you go, can I jump in real quick? I'm sorry, I'm just getting a bunch of private messages. I want to make sure you hear, Rabbi, that a bunch of people in this conversation are thanking you for your insight and for your perspective. It's overwhelming on this side. So just wanted to make sure you heard that before Wendy concluded the session. So I apologize for cutting you off, Wendy. And Rabbi, thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you to all of you.
Rabbi, thank you so much for spending time with us. I'm struck by the notions of uncertainty and control. And I think sometimes we say, we plan and God laughs. And I think that's especially true during this time. And the inability to plan really affects all of us. But you've given us great food for thought and ways to, I might have to go buy some soap, but I really appreciate your giving us such a thoughtful presentation, and I so enjoyed learning with you, as I'm sure, and I know from seeing the comments that everyone else did. So thank you so much. Thank you to all of you who have participated in this session, and I hope you will continue to enjoy. There's so many wonderful workshops in the days to come, and the plenaries as well. And I just want to say thank you again, and please, everyone, just be well. Take care.
Thank you.